Hi everybody, my name is Katie. I've been playing Animal Crossing New Horizons every day since it launched. This is the fourth episode in the Island Designer series. Today we are going to finish the process of flattening the island, and before we begin building up the new theme, I want to talk about a few of the artistic principles that I use to enhance my island. Since episode 3, I took down most of the terraforming, and I also took out most of the extra path and custom patterns so everything would be ready. If you look at the mini map in the bottom corner, you might still see a little bit of pathing. This is new stuff I put down just to help demonstrate some examples for you guys to see here in a minute. So just ignore that. At the moment, I'm taking down the last section of cliff. I thought it might be useful for you to see how I go about removing large chunks of terraforming. And I'm going to begin by just taking every other line down. This makes the process really straightforward, and while it takes a lot of time, it doesn't require much attention. So I usually put on a movie or my favorite streamer, and I just chill out and I enjoy the task. I actually really like this type of busy work in the game. I find it's kind of relaxing as long as I don't have to think too much about it. The concepts I'm going to share with you today aren't rules. Every situation is different, but if you find yourself struggling with an area and you just don't know why it isn't coming together, maybe one of these tips or principles can help you. I'm going to head over to my example areas here. The first principle is to use odd numbers when you decorate, especially with repeated objects such as these lily of the valley flowers. You can see here that I have 1, and then there's 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's a big difference in the way that the aesthetics look when you have the even numbers and the odd numbers. For most people, our eye prefers odd numbers, and you would want to go with 1, 3, and 5 versus the 2 and 4. The second one I want to talk about is how objects look better if you group them together. And then the second part of that is that taller objects are usually better if you place them in the back of those groupings. This helps the eye to know where to look and assists with creating depth and complexity. Here are a few examples. I've got the lantern propped up on a little bit of a stone stool here because I want it to be taller. And I have the 3 objects forming a little bit of a stair-step descent from top to middle to bottom. Over here we have the lamp, and then the plant and the table are one object going down all the way to the stool at the bottom. Over here we have the bookshelf, down a step to the table and the basket, and down a step to the plant. We have the silo, down to the well, down to the bucket. Let's look a little bit about how we put those items together. So here I have 3 objects, and if we wanted to assemble them together so that they had a grouping, I want to put the taller item in the back. And so then I'm going to push. This is obviously the shorter item, even though it's big and wide, it's shorter. And push this plant up and into place. There are a couple of ways to think about the spacing on it, but when you cluster them together in this fashion, it helps us to see that this is a 3-dimensional world. In addition to objects, the cliffs in the game can also be used to create that taller object in the back, and that's what I've done here with these flowers. I have a cliff set up so that it looks much taller behind the plants. As we look at the flowers again, they are also an example of the third concept, which is contrast. It's easy to see these thin, light little flowers because I placed the brown cliff behind them. The difference in color from that helps the flower to stand out. If I take down a section of the cliff really quick, you should be able to see what I mean about having that make the flower stand out. So here where we have the cliff versus here where we don't. The cliff helps the flowers to be easier to see. I'm going to do a couple examples for you guys. I've set up 2 spaces with decorative objects. They aren't bad spaces, but I'm going to take a couple small adjustments using the tips I've shared with you today and make them a little more interesting. So here we have the bench and a tree, and it has the cliff behind it, and the fence helps create a little bit of background, but the objects are pretty far away. So the first tip here is to remember to group objects together. The third is that it usually looks better in threes and smaller items in the front. So I'm just going to pull out a little planter and I'm going to set it down right here. Now, I didn't put the planter down over here because I want to go from tall to down in an ascending group. I don't want to go down from left to right or down from right to left. And so you can see here a couple very small little changes, really enhances the area, and it's just a little cuter this way. Let's go back and look at the other example. It's a little bit more tricky to see. Here I have the beautiful white stakes and the post. The post is clearly tall and even with a lot of the other items. So the first thing I would probably want to do is just push that really high item back a little bit. With the way that this grouping is at the moment, the signpost is my highest object, and then this is the flower wagon here, is kind of next. And then down from that are the fence pieces, and the fence pieces are behind. So there are a few things we can do to just make this look a little bit better. The first one is to consider how the whole area is going to look. So if I put down a couple log benches on the other side of this path, they are part of the same picture that the eye sees. And that almost helps create that down from taller to medium to smaller because they're shorter. Just also being placed on the other side of the path makes them look a little bit smaller. And the next thing I want to do is come up here and put a cliff in place. You'll notice that I've used the blue hyacinth flowers behind the wood stakes, and that was intentional as well. I wanted to make sure there was good contrast between the white of the log stakes and the blue of the flowers. So this would be a really good place not to use white hyacinth, but most of the flower colors would have good contrast against the white. Just putting up a little bit more cliff here. And already you can see that adds a lot more contrast. It adds the higher element behind, which draws the eye in to the scene that we have in front of us and really improves the way the area looks. I'm going to do one more change to this area. I want you to see how things might look if they were adjusted a fair amount. And I'm going to bring these little white stakes all the way forward and let them be the shorter item and put the wagon behind them. And this will just be a good example of the way that the little changes that we create in the game can affect the way that the picture looks. One additional trick, especially with these posts, I usually flip every other one around so that there's more variety in the line that you see. All right, I'm just going to run around the back here real quick and put down the garden wagon. All right, so if you think about where we were before to here, we used all of the different let's call them tips that we talked about today, and we put them together to make what I think is a more interesting area in the game. And most people will walk by and they won't think about the details and the steps and the work that it took to get there, but they will notice that the area looks really good to their eye. The last tip I want you to remember when decorating is that you won't always get areas to look the way you want right away. Adjust the items until you are happy. Persistence and experimentation are key to creativity. Before the next video, I'm going to finish mapping out the spaces on my island, and I'll begin moving houses and buildings into place so we will be ready for you to decorate with me. For more information about what I mean by island mapping, you can check out episode 3, my previous Island Designer series video. As always, I hope you found something useful here, and I encourage you to continue creating in this game. Until next time, have the best Animal Crossing day.